Hare Krishna Jagadguru. Hare Krishna Jagat. Aho Pashyat Narinam. Aho Pashyat Narinam. Hare Krishna Jagadguru. Hare Krishna Jagadguru. Duranta Bhava Yoga Mrityu Pashan Vihavihan. Aho Pashyat Narinam. Aho Pashyat Narinam. Hare Krishna Jagadguru.
Hare Krishna Jagadguru.
Duranta Bhavam Yo Vidyan.
Duranta Bhavam Yo Vidyan.
Mrityu Pasan Vihavihan.
Mrityu Pashan Vihavihan.
Aho Pashyat Narinam.
Aho Pashyat Narinam.
Hare Krishna Jagadguru.
Hare Krishna Jagadguru. Duranta Bhavam Yo Vidyan.
Mrityu Pasan Vihavihan.
Mrityu Pashan Vihavihan. And we'll read the word for words together. Aho Pashyata. Just see, Narinam, of these women, Api, even, Krishna, Krishna, Jagadguru, the spiritual master of the entire universe, Duranta, unlimited, Bhavan, devotion, Ya, which, Richu, of death, Pashan, the bonds, Adyan, illness and life. Translation, we can read this together. Just see the unlimited love of these women who have developed spiritual master of the entire universe. Love has broken death, their attachment to family. Purport. Superficially, the husbands, fathers, fathers-in-law, and so on were the ladies' gurus or teachers. Yet the women had become perfect in Krishna consciousness, whereas the men had fallen into the darkness of ignorance. According to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, upon returning home, the ladies showed transcendental ecstatic symptoms, such as trembling of the body, shedding of tears, standing of the bodily hairs on end, discoloration of the complexion, crying out, "O pleasure of my life, O Krishna," with faltering words, and so on. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur goes on to state that while one may object that it is not fitting for a woman to love anyone other than her husband, here the husbands themselves point out that they are gurus only in imitation of the Supreme Lord, who is Jagadguru, the universal teacher and spiritual master. The husbands noted that the women, having perfected their transcendental attachment for Krishna, did not have even a trace of attachment left for home, husband, children, and so forth. Therefore, from that day on, the husbands accepted those ladies as their worshipable spiritual masters and no longer thought of them as their wives or property. So, very interesting purport. And Prabhupada makes, or the philosophy presented through the acharyas, it presents things very, very clearly. And I think I mentioned this before, how it's important to understand Srila Prabhupada's philosophy and instructions, and also the philosophy which comes through the acharyas in the later volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's important to understand those through the proper lens, a clear lens of trying to understand what is bhakti, and as it's described in the second verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that this it's described this knowledge is very difficult to understand, and that even the great sages and demigods, they become bewildered as to what is the absolute truth. but it's described in the Bhagavatam that it's understandable by those who are pure in heart. So it's important that we be striving to have pure hearts so we can understand the Srimad Bhagavatam through a clear lens, not a discolored lens, so we can get this vision of how that philosophy can be applied for the welfare of all. And the difficulty is if we have a colored lens with material desires, if I have desires for profit, adoration, distinction, my glasses might be pink or blue or something, so I'm going to see everything with a bluish tinge. It'll be a little filtered. So if I have some material motives, I may read the Srimad Bhagavatam, maybe try to understand Vedic philosophy and culture, and I'm going to see it through that tinted lens. So if I have the lens of desiring profit, adoration, distinction, I might develop this vision like the Brahmins, how these ritualistic ceremonies are so important. I might develop the lens that I have a lens, I'm looking for profit, adoration, distinction. I might see the philosophy through the lens how the Brahmanas are the topmost men in society, how they're the gurus of everyone, and therefore everyone should accept my words and bow down at my feet and offer me dakshin, and as what happened in the Vedic system, Srila Prabhupada describes this, how it became corrupted to the point where one class of men used their position in society to lord it over the others. And the whole system became ruined. And actually, it became to the point of disrepute, that people rejected Varnashram because they saw how it was exploiting society. And Gandhi was very famous for trying to promote a classless society, that we're all Harijans, we're all children of God. That's true, we're all children of God. But Prabhupada used to point out very clearly that those distinctions are there in society. There's a martial class of men, there's a mercantile class of men, there's a priestly or Brahminical class of men, and there's a worker class of men. Those distinctions are there, they're natural. But the system is that those classes of men are meant to work harmoniously to support each other, to all develop love of God. It's not that one class was exploiting the other, and that's when things become problematic if the philosophy of the Vedas or even Krishna consciousness becomes filtered through colored lenses. And we have, unfortunately, even within our own movement, examples of that. In one of our god sisters had studied different religions, and she was saying it was very common in most religions that when the religious movement started, there was a great emphasis on renunciation, almost too much. And we see how that happened, in our own society very, very early in the movement. There was a emphasis on renunciation, and also through maybe some filtered lenses, which maybe slightly distorted the philosophy and the application of that philosophy. So there was one phenomena in our movement, it was called the Radha Damodar Sankirtan Party, and it was actually, in some ways, extremely successful at making devotees and distributing huge amounts of Srila Prabhupada's books. Very, very successful. There was many buses traveling around North America preaching, and however, some things became just a little distorted in their view. And individuals in the Radha Damodar party, they began to adopt this philosophy that, well, the brahmachari life is the best, everyone should be brahmacharis. We have the best program because we're doing the most preaching. They would go into temples and they would encourage the brahmacharis to just leave the temple and join the Sankirtan party. So, like, you can imagine, you're trying to start a temple in some place, some city, and some traveling party comes through, and then all your manpower, all your brahmacharis are suddenly go off on a traveling party. And so that was actually quite disruptive. And so that became problematic. It was interesting that somebody asked me if we had association with Vishnu John Swami, and he came through Vancouver once in the 70s, and it was quite interesting that although he was a member of that Radha Damodar party, he didn't have that attitude, because we had one godbrother there who was a brahmachari at the time, and he asked Vishnu John if he could join him and travel with him. And Vishnu John said, no, you should stay in the temple and serve in your temple. And we have another godbrother who at that time was living on Vancouver Island. Vishnu John Swami went there and stayed with him and preached to him and talked to him. And so he asked that young man, who was not a devotee at the time, if he would like to join the party. So he said, Vishnu John, he observed that etiquette, that the brahmacharis in the temple, they belonged there. He didn't, he didn't try and literally steal them out in the middle of the night or something. And that happened. And somebody who was outside the temple, he encouraged them to join the party. So he had that very balanced attitude. And some other problematic things that came from that era, not just from that party, but also from the immaturity of devotees trying to artificially renounce and develop what they thought was pure devotional service, began to think that, again, because by misunderstanding the philosophy, and misunderstanding the philosophy again means seeing things through a filtered lens, and then sometimes we use the word cherry picking certain verses or quotes to kind of endorse and reinforce my maybe materially filtered view of what Krishna consciousness is. So I might be thinking that, okay, renunciation is the most important thing, and I'm thinking that, well, therefore I'm kind of renounced, so therefore I must be kind of really advanced. And therefore, because I'm really renounced and really advanced, anyone who's not renounced can't be very advanced. Then I start to see through a lens that it's described in the Bhagavatam, and the Bhagavatam is referring to materialistic grihastas, that for them it's like a deep, dark well. Grihasta life is like a deep, dark well. And at the same time, if I'm a grihasta, it is actually a fact. If I'm a grihasta and I don't practice Krishna consciousness, there's a danger I could fall into a deep, dark well. But if a Krishna conscious grihasta is practicing Krishna consciousness, it's an ashram, it's not a deep, dark well. But this paradigm was created that, okay, grihasta life is a deep, dark well. And that actually became the preaching. And not just the preaching, but it creates a paradigm. So a paradigm is like it's like a lens. And if you speak a idea, repeat it, it becomes a paradigm. There's a common phrase, actually, Adolf Hitler used this technique that if you tell a lie enough, people will believe it. And some politicians in our present day and age, you just continually lie, and the people just believe it. So by presenting the philosophy in an inappropriate way, it can create a negative paradigms in others. So there was this paradigm that grihastha life was a deep, dark well, that women were Maya, and so that becomes a paradigm that other people think, well, maybe this is true. It must be true, because these senior devotees are preaching it, and it kind of says things like that in the Shastra. And again, by continually hearing those things, like you may doubt in the beginning, but you hear these negative things enough, you start to think, well, maybe it's true. And then the result is you start to see through that lens. And so our observation of our society over the years was that those kind of paradigms very much undermined the Krishna consciousness integrity of our society and the Krishna conscious integrity of individuals and their sense of worth in their individuality and in their ashrams. So for the Grihastha ashram, if someone's continually telling you, you're less, you're not very intelligent, you're in the deep dark well, and you keep hearing that, it's almost like a subtle form of emotional abuse. It's not like gross emotional abuse, but it's a subtle form. And that subtle form can aware your sense of self-worth. So what occurred in our society, devotees would enter into Grihastha life, and we heard a story from one devotee in Brazil. This is just a small example that was kind of funny, but maybe not really. He got married, and then had the wedding ceremony, and one of his brahmachari godbrothers gave him a present for the wedding. And the present was a bucket, a rope, and a flashlight for the deep dark well. So maybe it's a joke, but is that encouraging? It's kind of from the negative paradigm. So some grihasthas were affected by that paradigm that my ashram, it's actually less. It's not that important. It's a well. It's something different than my spiritual life. And inevitably in all ashrams there's going to be challenges. And in grihastha ashrams there's challenges. And so sometimes grihasthas, they would face these challenges, face difficulties in their marriages, and they would think, well, maybe this is a deep dark well. I'm experiencing challenges, so maybe this is the deep dark well. And they wouldn't bother working on their marriages. And unfortunately, in our society, for many years, and in some places still, we have divorce rates that are higher than the outside world. So obviously something is not being done right. So that's the very detrimental effect of negative paradigms. And also the negative paradigm that women are less intelligent. So that was being propagated around the society, and especially in North America, it was creating quite a disturbance. So eventually the temple presidents were realizing, this is going on everywhere, and they realized they had to do something. So they actually went to Srila Prabhupada and made a report that Srila Prabhupada, this is going on. And it's creating disturbance, taking men from the society, undermining devotees' Krishna consciousness. And so at this time, again, this party was extremely successful in distributing books and preaching on one platform. So Srila Prabhupada heard this, and he was quite disturbed by that. And he called I won't mention the name, but the devotee who was the head of that whole program, he called him and actually chastised him quite severely for the disturbance he was causing. And the devotee who was being chastised, Prabhupada, for what was going on in this program, just made this maybe kind of a flippant remark. What do you want me to do, go to China? And then he walked out of the room. And then apparently the next morning in Mangal Artik, I think Hari Sari mentions this, that Prabhupada asked him to go get that devotee and have him come to the room. And so that devotee went up to Prabhupada's room, and before Prabhupada said anything, this devotee said, "I'm not going." And Prabhupada said, "No." He said, "Your spiritual master spoke through you. You have to go to China." So he actually did go to China, and he did some significant preaching there. And that whole party was actually, that program, unfortunately,
Prabhupada stopped it.
he stopped it, yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate because the book distribution was very successful, but the mood was wrong. The whole mood was wrong, and it was adversely affecting the society. So that was, again, if you go back to the second verse, the absolute truth, it's for the welfare of all. So if we're preaching in a way that undermines devotees' enthusiasm and their sense of self-esteem and worth, that's not Krishna consciousness. That becomes into the realm of perverted varnashram dharma. And here we see this great controversy about women gurus in our society, and these opinions flowing back and forth. But here we see these Brahmins, they accepted their wives as their guru. what more can you say about that? And also recently, someone did some studying and they compiled a list of all the different Vaishnava acharyas of female disciples they had that became gurus. And there's actually quite a significant number of Vaishnavis that became gurus in the Vaishnava tradition. And so it's not something foreign. And also when Srila Prabhupada, when he heard of these things one time, he called a bunch of the leaders and he quoted the verse, Kiba Vibra, Kibra Nasi, Sibanyasi, Sudra Kenanaya, Ye Krishna Tattva Veta Se Guru Haya. Whether one is a Vaishya, a Sudra, a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, whatever, if he understands the science of Krishna, he can become a guru. And apparently Prabhupada quoted that verse 3 times, banging his fist on the table. He just was trying to make that point. And even there's some people who say that if you're not what do they say? If you're grahasta, you shouldn't get the full Brahminical, the full Gayatri mantra or something. I don't know where this is coming from. That women shouldn't get Gayatri. I mean, where is that coming from? Where's that stuff coming from? It's so very extremely important to understand Prabhupada's books, with that concept that I have to understand this for my own advancement, and if I'm trying to understand how to give this information to others, this philosophy to others, it has to be in a way that's actually for their welfare and not with that motive, not colored by any filter that for profit, adoration, distinction, or trying to control someone, even subtly. That's can be very detrimental to our own spiritual lives if we have that. And therefore we see in the Chaitanya Charitamrita how when they cleaned the Godincha temple, not just once, but 3 times, that, you think everything's clean, and then Lord Chaitanya says, let's do it again. And they cleaned everything with Lord Chaitanya with his cloth, personally. Mother Jamuna said once she was with Srila Prabhupada, and I think she'd been cleaning his room, and she came in, and Prabhupada just picked up, I think it was a stapler, and somehow there was a little bit of dust on the stapler that Prabhupada, he would notice these very minute things. And not that he was being like excessive, compulsive, but just making that point that, we clean everything because we're also trying to clean our heart. And Jamuna used to say how Srila Prabhupada would say that Krishna consciousness means attention to detail. And so we want to keep everything clean and tidy and neat and straight, and it's very important. And also in our consciousness, it's very important to look for that dust in our heart, that any tinge of those desires for control or position or manipulation, we want to try and see those things and weed them out, because they can hinder our devotional service. At the same time, sometimes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had one disciple who was quite expert in organizing and things, and apparently this devotee was maybe stealing some money. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati made a comment, he's doing a great amount of service, it would cost me more to hire someone to do what he was doing. So sometimes individuals may have those tendencies and they can be engaged in devotional service, but the understanding is, because they're engaged in devotional service, they should and they will eventually become purified. So sometimes we may have those tendencies, or we may see some people who have those tendencies, but devotional service is a purifying process, and we all have different kinds of anarthas. So sometimes we may have to be patient with others who may have some material tendencies, but at the same time we have to be very careful that individuals with material tendencies are not adversely affecting others. My observation is some devotees have anarthas and even be somewhat offensive, and 50 years later, they're still, I've been engaged in devotional service and chanting 16 rounds for like 50 years. And I've seen other devotees who have some ulterior motive in their devotional service. Sometimes they fall away for some time. Sometimes if you have the motive, those tendencies, but you're exploiting others in that process, that can be very detrimental and impede devotional service. And I think that's one of the biggest causes of fall down is to misuse your position or the philosophy to exploit others. That can be very detrimental. So this is a very, very, very important part of the Bhagavatam. Is very, actually every part of the Bhagavatam is extremely important, and there's something to learn from. And this verse particularly, but it really shows the importance of understanding the essence of the philosophy, that anyone can become a devotee, irregardless of their circumstances. Lord Chaitanya, he had devotees who were Sudras, Ramananda Roy. He had devotees who were like kings, King Prataparudra, devotees that were Vaishyas, devotees that were Brahmins. All kinds of different people came to Lord Chaitanya. Our Namacharya, Haridas Thakur, he could not even go in the Jagannath temple. Actually, one devotee was telling me recently he went to Jagannath Puri and his wife was quite disturbed. I mean, they were both Indian, but they didn't even go in because they were disturbed that they wouldn't let Westerners into the Jagannath Puri temple. And but they were so disturbed that how these Brahmins, they find all these faults that in Western Vaishnavas. Some of these pundits come out and say your acharya is not bona fide. Or I remember doing Harinam once in Jagannath Puri, and these pundits were coming out looking at the devotees like, you have a clasp on your neck beads, you're not a Vaishnava. Because you have a little middle clasp, they consider that disqualifies you from being a Vaishnava. So that mentality is present today. Although at the same time, there's many Brahmanas in that Jagannath Puri temple are actually very favorably disposed to Western Vaishnavas. In fact, we were there doing Harinam once on one of Vaisheshika's retreats, doing Harinam outside the temple, and some of the Brahmanas came up and they brought all this Mahaprashadam for us. And so they actually respect the Vaishnava, although the others do not. So those things are there and they'll always be there, and it's likely they're always going to be there in our society because we are a society that's growing and we're encouraging people to come to Krishna consciousness, and people are coming and they're in the material world because they have anartas, and they're going to come into our movement with anartas, and in the process of removing their anartas, it's likely they're going to create a few problems. So that's always going to be there. But it's very important that we need to understand the philosophy and learn to see, what was Prabhupada's mood, what was Prabhupada's standard, how he dealt with people, how he preached the philosophy, and really catch that essence. And I think that's one of the great fortunes we have is there are recordings of Srila Prabhupada giving class, and also recordings of Srila Prabhupada in dealing with people he would meet for the first time, and those conversations. And those conversations are extremely interesting in how Prabhupada, how he didn't really, you never hear Prabhupada pushing the philosophy on someone. He would present it according to time and circumstance in a way those individuals could at least go away with a favorable impression of Krishna consciousness. I remember once he was talking to some science fiction writer, and Prabhupada just let this man speak his mind about his theory of life, how was that everyone should go to outer space or something, and we should have rockets going to outer space so we can perpetuate society on other planets in case this planet collapses. And the man was going on and on. I thought, well, I thought Prabhupada would just shut him down or something. Prabhupada just heard the man out, and then somehow Prabhupada related that to Krishna consciousness, and the man went away happy and satisfied. And that's how Prabhupada was. He saw how to present a way how to present the philosophy in a way that was for that person's welfare, that would actually have a positive effect, to change their heart. And that's not something that's always easy to do, to see how to do that according to time and circumstance. But again, if we at least understand that should be our goal, to develop that kind of very pragmatic understanding of how to apply the philosophy according to time and circumstance, then we can be a very great service to Srila Prabhupada. So I'm going to stop there. If anyone has any questions or comments or takeaways. That's a hand and a finger. One hand up. Okay.
I thought it was quite interesting that the husbands know that the women, having perfected their transcendental attachment for Krishna, did not have even a trace of attachment left for home, husband, children, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So you could think, well, that would make them like, oh, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, it could, I don't know, like, I'm worthless or something
Mhm,
like that. But you can see that they appreciated it, that they didn't have material attachments,
Mhm.
and that they appreciated their pureness.
Yeah.
And then you see, like, if a person who's in Kanishta, they mimic that
Mm-hmm.
no attachment for all those
Mhm.
things. It's strange.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's really there, it's wonderful and perceivable and doesn't have a negative effect.
Yeah, exactly. We were working with one of the leaders in China, Radhacharan, very wonderful devotee, originally from, I think, France. Married a Chinese lady, moved to China, and so we were actually going to go there, but it didn't happen because of COVID, but we did some things online with him. And he told us they kind of changed the preaching strategy in China. He was saying over 90% of the people who join, become active, are ladies, married ladies. And they get married, and they take the Krishna consciousness, and they get all enthusiastic, and then their husbands and families get kind of bewildered by what's happening, and there's some tension created in the families. And so he said he changed his preaching strategy, and when some lady would come and want to join, he would say, oh, I want to meet your husband, I want to meet your kids and your parents. And he would speak to them about Krishna consciousness in a very nice way. And he would tell these ladies, what you have to do for your Krishna consciousness is your husband, your children, your parents, your husband's parents, they need to see that you're becoming a better person. You're becoming a better mother, a better wife. And so they start.
Before they would like stop cooking for their family, they sit and read all day, they wouldn't like do anything with their kids, they just got like, you know, fanatically into Krishna consciousness and their family life.
So he said the ladies started doing that, and then he was getting reports for these ladies that, you know, their kids were saying, hey mom, you look kind of spaced out when you're chanting japa, maybe you need to like go for a little walk or something. And the husbands were encouraging them, you know, yes, set up an altar, you know, in the house. And so it changed the whole dynamic when they didn't fall into that, you know, misconception that being unattached means totally detached. Being unattached in a material sense that, you know, my family's not just my sense gratification. It's my duty to Krishna to look after these people in a very nice way. That's actual detachment and not improper renunciation. Maybe, okay. One man, one lady. Okay, group.
Hare Krishna. First of all, I would I love what you mentioned just now, and my question is about that only. And I would like to apologize if it come out as rude because
No.
I heard in one of those lectures, like from ISKCON only. In that lecture, they were mentioning about that when Grihastha start their life, they have at least little bit kind of attachment with their family. So they have to take birth again. They don't directly go to Goloka. They have to take birth again. They become brahmacharis and then they go to Goloka. So is this also a misconception which I...
Yes. Our god sister Jamuna, Prabhupada told her And ashram means a factory for producing devotion. So in the Grihastha ashram, it's a factory for producing devotion. It's not an impediment. There is one sampradaya, they actually say that, what is it, you do your duties as it's a similar kind of thing. You have to do your duties as a Grihastha for so long, then
Perfect Vaishya, then
Right,
you become
right.
a perfect
Perfect Sudra.
Kshatriya, then you become a perfect Brahman, and then you go back. So that's like the evolution of a natural progression. But because of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, anybody can take the elevator. You don't have to go through the stairs. Just like if you're a dog, you gotta become, I don't know, what's next, you know, a bear, you know, until you get into the species, right? If you give that dog prasad, what happens?
He took the elevator.
Well, at least he'll get a human being. He doesn't have to go through all of that.
In Vaishnavism and our theology, there's no impediment to devotional service. You can be in any position of life. And again, like our Nam Acharya Haridas Thakur, he couldn't even go in the Jagannath temple. Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, they were considered Muslims because they were employed by Muslims. But they were like the topmost Vaishnavas. So any situation is not an impediment for going back to Godhead. It's just our material, perceived, designated positions in society. That's just an instrument for us to evolve spiritually. So there is no impediment for any position or any ashram.
Yes.
That's important.
Because when I heard that, question arose in my mind that, okay, I'm listening to this from a person who's sitting at Vyasasana, but then what about Bhaktivinoda Thakur Maharaj?
Exactly.
So, are you again implying that he had to take another birth
Yeah.
after writing so
Yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
bhajans on
Yeah.
Krishna
Yeah.
and everything? So I was very confused
Yes.
about it. But
Yes.
actually, as you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
that it will create an impact in our minds as well
Yes.
to follow that, and unknowingly we will be having that lens
Yes.
on
Yes.
our own.
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess it was getting developed somewhere or the other. But
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying
Yeah.
it.
So that's important. You know, sometimes we have, it's kind of a confusion, but actually it's kind of a message that's coming from your heart. And that's why important to, like Prabhupada, he used to say, you should read all my books. Because then we get the actual picture. There's less chance of getting confused if we understand what Srila Prabhupada said. But yeah, very important to, you know, if something doesn't sit right with you, it's not that you have to accept. You don't have to accept what I'm saying. If something doesn't resonate with you, even Krishna says, Arjuna, you know, if I've said this to you, Arjuna, now it's your decision, you do what you like. So it's important that we, you know, if something doesn't resonate, you have to give it further thought. So it's a very, very good question, not a rude question, very relevant question. Thank you. Damayanti, did you have a thumb up?
I don't have a question, right? I did that because she had.
Okay.
But I can say something. I liked your point where you said that even if something is very successful, but the mood of that behind that is not very inspiring to everybody's Krishna consciousness, then Prabhupada had to stop that.
Yeah.
That's a very relevant point because I feel that like if you can inspire in a way which helps others to grow in their spiritual life, then probably something is wrong with that person himself. And maybe they need to look in and see
Yeah.
if there's some things that they need to change. Or you're saying like the lens need to be cleared up, or some kind of lens is up which
Yeah.
needs to change.
Many individuals who had those kind of attitudes, literally at a certain point in their spiritual life, they ran into brick walls and they left Krishna consciousness for some time.
But this person totally changed.
He changed, yeah, he did change, yeah.
Like Prabhupada purified it.
Yeah,
Went
yeah.
to China, right?
But then, totally changed his trajectory. Turned out a very, very different person in the end. Very different.
And from one point of view, we will all end up in these situations somehow for us to learn something.
Yeah.
And so even those situations where someone is saying these things, or maybe it's affecting us a little bit, it's an opportunity for us to learn something. So somehow, Prabhupada would say, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Lord. So we don't necessarily want to criticize individuals who are doing that, but just realize that, you know, maybe that's not correct. And maybe if we're in a position where we can correct them, we can do something. But maybe there's something I'm supposed to learn from this myself.
Taking it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. There was a hand here.
First of all, thank you so much Prabhu, for bringing up this topic and discussing this. I think this is very relevant because some of us, we might not know, but we might have those kind of, thought process or thinking behind. Like we might not be intentionally thinking like that, but because of hearing to some lectures or maybe reading something, we might have developed something like this. But this lecture clears up everything, that it doesn't matter if you are a brahmachari or grahastha. What matters is devotion, because this women, like this brahmana ladies, they supposedly they've not followed the rules and regulations of being in a grahastha, like they've left their husband and went to Krishna. But still their husbands are accepting them as spiritual masters, so it's amazing, and there's nothing blocking us from being fully Krishna conscious, loving Krishna, whether you're in grahasthashram or in married life. My question was, I think you already answered it without me asking the point you were mentioning, that I was like, how people still have this mentality. And we see them, some of them are also in leadership positions, they are also gurus. So how do we see them? Because sometimes I feel like, am I committing offense if I'm not feeling very good while listening to them, or usually or generally I try to ignore this kind of people with this mentality. Like I don't listen to them. If I encounter something, I'll just pay respects from a distance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And not interact much, so that I not commit offenses. But if I have to explain this to someone, for example, someone from my family is getting attracted to them,
Yes.
and I have to explain them that why, then I feel like, am I committing an offense against that person? Because I don't feel like, I don't know, that they are different in their approach and whatever their mentality is, but I don't feel like they're doing something very, scandalous, because they're also trying to serve Shri Prabhupada, but there might be something that they have misunderstood or whatever. How do we look at them?
I think you're right. Like if you can respect from a distance and maybe filter out what they're saying. And as you're saying, sometimes that someone, your family or people in the community hear these kind of things and become a little bewildered.
You said they were attracted.
Attracted as in
Attracted, which is scary to you.
Yeah. That's when it's important to let them know actually what the essence of Srila Prabhupada's teachings were. As, to the best of your ability, not in a way critical to what they're saying. That you say that how they have their opinion, but the opinion of our Acharya was, and the result of our Acharya's preaching was Krishna consciousness spread all over the world to all kinds of people, and so important to, if other people are being adversely affected, to make sure they get the right understanding.
I like how Srimad Bhagavatam, she doesn't spare anyone. If you are a brahmachari and if you think, you're a renunciate, there are very shlokas in which there was a king who has so many queens, but so-called Durvasa Muni, so-called renunciate, he came and he did some aparadh. So there are a lot of stories also of this. So I like how Srimad Bhagavatam warns. Even like you said that sometimes for sannyasi, Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't. And yeah, I was feeling that if I would have read Srimad Bhagavatam without any guidance, without any proper teachers, then it's very easy to see with one kind of lens. So I also thought that it's very important who is speaking. It's very important. And how he has understood it. It kind of gives you the chance to change your color. If it's red, now it's red or blue. Then it will be maybe more red. Then it will be clear. So,
And like, it's very important to read all of Srimad Bhagavatam, not to. It's important for the grahastas to read those verses about how the family can become like jackals, and it can become a deep dark well if I don't take Krishna consciousness seriously. I could become almost like a karmi. It's important for grahastas to hear that. And like I say, for brahmacharis, there's warnings. For people in the renounced orders, there's warnings. It's important that we read that Bhagavatam, because those things are reminders for us. You know, I've got to be serious about our spiritual life. And then one day we'll actually be able to really understand the 10th canto if we fully purify our heart. But you have to read through the whole Bhagavatam.
So Prabhu, according to what we understand is that Prabhupada sets the standard. But as we were mentioning about lenses here, he has different wonderful disciples like yourself, mother, and many more. And all of them are trying to serve Prabhupada in different ways. In India, there might be a different approach, here might be a different approach. My major question is, everyone kind of interprets or sees with their own lens. How do we as a practicing devotees sees that? Because one day I might be influenced by, let's say, lens of a little red color, next day might be a little pinkish color or blue color. How do we come to a conclusion? As Prabhupada mentioned, unity in diversity. So who is the one?
Maybe that's time and circumstance. Like if you're a brahmachari, or if you made a commitment to brahmachari, even for 1 year, 6 months, you want to have a little bit of a brahmachari lens on, and be looking for those verses that are going to, reinforce your brahmachari. So if a brahmachari is about, household life can be a deep dark well, you're going to see that through the lens of, not that the grahastas are fallen, but I might take the household life just for sense gratification. I could fall in a deep dark well. So it might give you some reinforcement to, be more strict in your thoughts as a brahmachari. Not that you use that knowledge to judge others. So, in one sense, we do need to see through the lens of whatever our ashram is, to encourage us to advance in our situation. And also it's important to see it through kind of a universal lens, because we're meant to be a preaching society and encouraging everyone to take the Krishna consciousness, that how can we use that knowledge to help everyone advance? So if I'm seeing through the brahmachari lens that I don't want to fall in that deep dark well, but then you start preaching to people who are thinking some brahmachari is going to leave the ashram, and you start telling them, don't fall in a deep dark well. Maybe just had your lens on in the wrong moment. So, have to be thoughtful. Actually, we're a little over time. I apologize. You all have very important services to do. So, I don't know how much more we'll get to see of you today. It's always a pleasure to come to the academy here and associate with students. Some I've known you for a few years now, and it's gives us a great hope for the future of ISKCON, getting to know you and seeing how this program is developing. So we're very, very thankful to all of you, and for Damayanti for doing so much to organize this. It's a very wonderful program. So thank you all. Hare Krishna. Kripa Sindhya Eva Cha Patana Radio Vaishnava Namo Namaha